to our Summer Pet-iquette video series. My name is Nicola MacDonald and I am the Animal Welfare Operations Officer at Companion Animals New Zealand. In today's video, we'll be discussing the use of long lines and safe play in public spaces with Lisa Sturm, an accredited dog behaviour consultant and current Vice President of the Association of Professional Dog Trainers in New Zealand. Lisa is the founder of Kiwi Canine, an online store focused on non-aversive pet products and enrichment. Thanks for joining us today, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the basics. What are the main benefits of using a long line for dogs in public spaces like beaches? And could you explain exactly what a long line is?
Yes. A long line is essentially a long, lightweight leash. So it's not a retractable lead, it's a line, and it's typically between sort of 3 to 10 meters long. And it allows us as the handlers to give our dogs more freedom to explore while we are still keeping them safe. And sort of benefit-wise, it, as I just said, gives the safety. So we are preventing our dogs from running up to other people or in front of traffic or rushing other dogs or, chasing wildlife. It ensures that we can work with them at rehearsing behaviors near us, so we can reinforce behaviors that we want them to show rather than letting them rehearse behaviors that we don't want them to learn. And it's just in general a great training aid for recall and for focus, and it just helps us to set our dog up for success when we're out and about. I'm just going to show some long lines. So there's different materials. There's rope ones like these ones, which are work perfectly well. And then there is ones like these that is a biothane material. And the advantage of a biothane material is that it feels nice on your hand and does and works really well in rain and at the beach and those kind of things. They're a lot more expensive. So if you're just using the long line to practice with a puppy and you're planning on, having it just for a few months and then moving on, you're probably quite well off with just one of these. But if you are having, for instance, a reactive dog and you're going to use it for the rest of their life, or you just feel more comfortable in general using a long line, then a biothane one is probably the nicer option.
How do long lines work with dogs of different sizes and temperaments? Are there any adjustments that need to be made?
Most long lines come in different sizes. So for instance, this one here is a lot thinner with a thinner carabiner than the one that I showed prior, which is this one. So when we're comparing them, they look different in size carabiner wise. And so the difference in their thickness helps us to have dogs that are smaller and can't quite bear the weight of the heavier carabiners, but also dogs that are stronger and bigger and might need us to have more control physically. So that's the bigger lines. Temperament-wise, calm dogs can handle longer lines, whilst more excitable or maybe reactive dogs are better on maybe a little bit shorter lines. So we're talking like 5 meters maybe versus 10 meters. But you could also choose to have a calmer dog on a shorter lead, maybe because the environment doesn't actually allow that much space, or maybe it's just your preference to walk them on a shorter lead and it's less to handle. If the strengths of the guardian and the dog is particularly unmatched, so we have either an injured handler or a small handler and like a really strong, powerful dog, there's also a setup called a belay setup. Grisha Stewart invented that. It comes from the climbing world. And pretty much you're taking all the friction away from your hand and you're putting it into the carabiner. I'm going to show the setup of the belay belt quickly here. So we've got a belt that we can attach the treat pouch to. And then I'll just fast forward a little bit. We can have our belay set up on that. And you might have noticed this from rock climbing. So pretty much you can either have it just pull out, like I'm showing there, if the dog pulls away and you want to just let them go, or you can put a knot in if you want to, have your dog secured, even if you're letting go of the line. And then the dog can't get away. And in a moment, I will show what that looks like when you're actually putting on pressure. So there's the different lock techniques. So you can lock your hand in, and now the dog, it doesn't matter how hard they're pulling, they can't go anywhere. And there's different techniques. So that's the thumb lock. And then you want to brace yourself, go a little bit into your knees, and then all the pressure is just taken up by the ring and the carabiner. And then when we're practicing this with the dog in real life, we just keep feeding in the line in and out as we go. And then when we want to lock it, we just bring it behind ourselves like there, and it's locked in.
Thank you, Lisa. What are some common mistakes dog owners make with long lines, and how can they prevent them?
It can be a good next step when we're working with long line recall training to move on to letting the long line drag rather than holding on to it. And it still allows us to keep some control and step in. But oftentimes guardians tend to do that quite prematurely, and the dog is actually not ready. And then we're setting the dog up for failure. So it's always best to go at least a couple of weeks longer than you think and really proof the behavior before you move on to letting the long line drag. And then when you do move on to that, make sure to go back to easier environments so that you're still setting the dog up for success. It's important to actively manage the slack in the long line. So if you're just letting the long line kind of drag the whole 10 meters, say, then everyone gets tangled, whether it's just between the legs and the paws, or whether it's between even other people and dogs or trees and so on. So we really want to always just have a little bit of slack in the lead and keep actively managing it. When we have an excitable dog and an inexperienced handler, it's a good idea to practice long line lead handling at home first, and then maybe in a really, really quiet park. Oftentimes people think when they get a long line, they need to just get their dog out there now and go into all sorts of environments, when actually neither them nor the dog is ready for that. A pet peeve of mine is using a long line on a collar. I think that's particularly unsafe. I don't like using any leads on a collar, but at least when it's a short lead, the dog can't get into fast speed before they hit the end of the lead. But if you're using a 10-meter long line on a collar, you can really have the dog injure themselves quite severely. So that would be something that I really would discourage people from doing. And I think I'll show a video of where I'm handling a long line, just to show how I'm feeding it in and out, and how I'm always just keeping a little bit of slack. Right, so here, that's a 10-meter long line, and I just sort of have it over my right hand, and I use my left hand to feed it in and out as we are going. So if the dog is closer to me, I feed it further in, and then as the dog goes further away, I just smoothly let it out, and there's just that little bit of slack. So if they were to charge at something, they would have like a half a meter before I'd stop them. But at all times, I can give them the freedom that I want to give them. I'll let it run a little bit for a little bit more commentary. So here he's getting to the very end, and so I encourage him with my voice cue in a moment to move in a different direction. Actually, he got slack again, that's why I didn't. But I think in a moment I do. Yeah, so he's sort of moving in a direction a bit faster than I like him to, so I encourage him to change direction. I feed the leash in, and then we can reset ourselves.
Thank you. And are there any harnesses that you would recommend to use with long line training?
So I would always use a back clip harness with the long line, and ideally you have a harness that doesn't restrict sort of shoulder movement, so it doesn't go across here. There's lots of different brands that are fantastic. At Kiwi Canine, we use the Perfect Fit brand because you can fit different pieces together and make it fit on your dog. But there's lots of other really nice harnesses like Roughwear and other brands that also don't restrict the shoulder movement, and they have the back clip setup.
Thanks, Lisa. How do you manage interactions between your dog and other dogs or people when they're on a long line in public spaces?
Yeah, we always want to watch our dog's body language and also that of other dogs and other people to gauge whether we should allow any interaction or whether we're better off removing ourselves and our dog from the situation. In general, I don't find it a great idea to have dogs meet on a lead. They approach each other less naturally, so they're sort of front on and they're not curving like they would naturally. And if they're on a tight lead, they're even kind of leaning forward with wide, sort of almost threatening shoulder body language. And also they don't have the freedom as they would when they are off lead to feel like they can remove themselves if there's any tension. And of course, there's the risk of them getting tangled up. So it really does require two quite savvy handlers to have two dogs that are on a lead meet each other. And so generally, I wouldn't encourage it. Sometimes, however, the other dog is off lead and they just come up towards you and you can't really prevent the meeting very well. That's not great from the other guardian because they should always have their dog under effective control and they shouldn't let them just run up to your dog that's on a lead. But if that does happen, it's always good to still prevent, getting anything tangled and making it as easy on your dog as you can. So what I like to do is I hold the lead tight while the other dog is approaching, but then as they get there, I make sure to give some slack so that my dog doesn't feel the tension anymore. And then I need to kind of stay behind my dog at all times. So if there's any circling happening, I need to make sure that I stay behind with a slightly loose lead so that at any point I prevent the tangling, but also could remove my dog if I needed to. There's a good rule of thumb. That's the 3-second rule. So if the dogs have had 3 seconds to sniff, they're usually quite happy to move on. And that's also the point where they would either start playing or worst case start fighting and those kind of things. So it's like nice to count in your head. 1 sniff, 2 sniff, 3, let's go. And then you're moving your dog on. And usually that works really well. So that's what I would recommend doing. I wouldn't recommend taking them off the lead unless you are really comfortable doing so, because usually when you have your dog on a long line, you have a reason to have them on a long line. For dogs that are reactive or anxious around others, I would try to go into places where you're less likely to have dogs run up to you, so that you can remove yourself.
And what should dog guardians do if their dog gets tangled in the long line or becomes frustrated with it during playtime?
Yeah, so it's not a good idea having dogs play with each other while on the lead, but if anything, you'd have to drop the long line. There is an increased risk still of them, hurting themselves, and you still have the issue of the lack of recall probably. So I would recommend arranging for play dates and going to places where, you can be in fenced spaces and so on. But if your dog does get tangled for whatever reason, it's important to stay calm. I like to do like a retreat scatter, and then I like to put my foot near the dog on the long line so that the dog can stay sort of put for a moment while I sort everything out. If you are wearing a training belt, you can also what we call put a docking leash on the dog. So I have like a 80 centimeter lead on my training belt where I can just dock the dog for a moment, whether it's to pick up a poop or to untangle a situation, or maybe I work with a really strong dog and there's someone walking past with the dog and my dog's reactive, or those kind of situations. So that's nice. But otherwise, putting a foot on the lead and staying calm is always an easy way to untangle the dog.
Now let's talk about recall. How can a long line help teach a dog better recall and response to commands, especially in distracting environments like the beach?
Yeah, in a wide open space like the beach or the park, we can use the long line to practice recall. And we can start in super easy environments on really short distances and charge up our recall cue or sound, whether it's a whistle or whatever we're using. We really want to make sure that our dogs know that it's incredibly rewarding to respond to that cue. And we want to use something that they find incredibly rewarding. So whether that's really, really yummy treats or a fun game, maybe they like to play tag with a little toy, or maybe they like to chase something. Now, when we're using something to chase, it's always a good idea to use something that's sort of nearby. So for instance, there's things called like the chaser toy, which have like a long handle. Because if we are getting them to chase a ball or something that's far away, we're not really reinforcing that it's great to be near us. It is, however, also sometimes an option to use a ball or something for your recall reward. I just wouldn't make it the 100% of the time. And then we want to gradually increase the distance over time as the dog's recall improves. So if we are going to work on further distances, we want to make sure that there's less distractions, or if we're working on more distractions, we want to work on shorter distances again.
What are some signs that your dog is ready to be trusted off leash once their recall improves on the long line?
So if a dog consistently comes back when they're called and you have tried it, different distances, different distractions, environments, then you can start working with your dragging long line. So you can let go of the handle, but you can still step in. And again, you want to take it way back. If you're now letting the long line drag, make sure that you're in a really low distracting environment and that you practice on short distances. And then again, you want to really prove it. So if you think you're ready today to take your dog off lead, wait at least another 2 weeks and make sure that you check a lot of other situations before you go, oh, no, actually, I'm confident in their response now.
Is there any other advice you would give to someone who struggles with their dog pulling on the long line?
Yeah, so I guess it's important to note that a long line isn't a training tool, but it's a management tool. So while a dog tends to pull less if we give them more room, so if we're changing our lead from, a 1.50 meters to 5 meters, we tend to get a lot less pulling. It's still a good idea if we are having issues with pulling or with, running up to other dogs or running up to other people or chasing wildlife, to actually get a trainer on board. So obviously we want to look at cancer accredited trainers for that. They can help you work through actual training techniques while you're using the management tool of the long line.
So to wrap things up, Lisa, what are your top 5 tips for using a long line and ensuring safe play in public spaces with your dog?
Okay, so number 1 is set the dog up for success. Number 2 is pick your walking locations wisely. Number 3, carry a variety of things your dog finds greatly rewarding. Number 4, be fully focused and engaged at all times so you can manage the long line and the situations. Number 5, practice, practice, practice.
Thanks so much for sharing these valuable insights, Lisa. If you found these tips useful, don't forget to subscribe to our Companion Animals New Zealand YouTube channel, where we share more helpful summer pet-iquette videos. Until next time, enjoy your summer days.